I'm here with Richard, who has been teaching English in Korea for the last 5 years. Richard, I'm first curious as to what even made you want to go to Korea to teach. What got you into that?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me here, Glink. So I guess in my first year of university, I had like a group. We played like Dungeons and Dragons and video games together. And one of those guys, he was originally from Eastern Europe, and he said to us like, "Hey, every year I travel to Eastern Europe for the summer, but now because like I'm over 18, if you guys want to come with me, we can like travel Europe." And everyone kind of said no, and I just kind of said like, yeah, sure. So we went out, and I just kind of fell in love with like traveling. So the year after, we drove across the US. The year after, I went to Thailand, Cambodia, and Japan. I fell in love with Japan. I loved it. Um, I tried to go there as a teacher, but the pay just wasn't super high for like brand new people who wanted to start teaching. So I looked around. South Korea seemed like a good option because the pay was a bit higher. They cover housing in South Korea. So I said, okay, let's do South Korea for a year, reapply with more experience. And I just never left Korea. I've been here for a little over 5 years, and it's been a lot of fun.
Like broadly speaking, what have you noticed to be the major differences between Korean culture and Canadian culture, or just North American, I guess, culture in general? Like outside of even the education system, just in general, what have you noticed?
I would say so. Korea, it's a lot more. I would say the first thing is it's a lot more competitive. Like people here at a young age really compete with each other for jobs or in schooling, things like that. I would say that it's a lot more exciting of a place to live in. I'm from like a smaller city in northern Canada, so I'd say that being out here, it's really exciting. Like places pretty much never close. You can always find stuff open at any time. And I would say that it's all very dense. Like in the city, it's very dense. There's 50 million people in South Korea, and it's the size of like a smaller US state. So it's easy to get around anywhere. I know there was one place I lived where I had like a supermarket in the basement, restaurants on the second floor, gym in the building. It was connected to the subway, so I didn't have to leave for like anything. It was amazing. But I'd say those are the main differences.
And having grown up in that sort of Canadian, which I think is pretty similar to the American education system, what are some of the major differences in at least how Korea handles education now compared to when you were growing up in the Canadian system, for example? What are some of the major differences there?
Yeah, sure. So I would say in South Korea, one of the big differences is that in Canada, students go to public school and that's it. Like students in Canada might go to like a guitar academy or like, to learn like an instrument after school once a week, but that's kind of it. In South Korea, students usually go to academies either every day or most days of the week. So the school day, it's a little bit shorter. It usually ends at about 2 p.m. And then students go to, for example, English Academy to learn English, Math Academy to learn math, or Robotics Academy, things like that, to kind of get that extra learning and really find what they're interested in. I would also say that in Korea, like in Canada, for us, usually you go to the school that's closest to you. So if I live in the western end of the city, I go to one of these two public schools. In South Korea, the schools have like different tiers, even in like middle school. So students try to go for those better schools, even if they're a little bit farther away, or different things like that. Some schools focus on like science, math, more advanced learning, but for the most part, each school kind of has like a thing they specialize in.
Right.
I was going to add something interesting about South Korea is that they had, I think the proper name is corporal punishment, where like the teacher can like physically, yeah, yeah, with the student. They had that until about 2006 or 2007. So it was outlawed pretty recently. So I think that was kind of a big thing coming in here, it was that like a lot of teachers were still transitioning away from that into, we got to find different ways to be strict or kind of like have control of the classroom. Yeah.
Speaking of transitioning and periods of change, especially in the education system, tell me about how COVID and the transition to remote learning, how that's been, what that's really meant. Like, are all the classes online now? And also, how has the transition been for you and other faculty members, other teachers? Tell me a bit about that.
Definitely. So I would say with coronavirus, what's happened is some, like usually for a period of 2 or 3 weeks or longer, we'll go completely online. So I'll either bring my, laptop webcam home or I'll go to school to an empty classroom. There's a few different programs we use to like engage the students, but nothing beats being in the classroom. I mean, I think that's the best. For me, I teach kindergarten in the morning and elementary in the afternoon. The elementary kids, they're pretty good with like online learning. Like they kind of get like, yeah, we're going to look at the camera. The kindergarten class, they get a little bit more antsy with stuff. Like some of them will just like totally lean back or like stretch. Um, so that's been kind of a challenge, especially with the younger kids. But I think it's also given us like a good opportunity because like in teaching, it's a fairly stagnant thing. Like however our parents learned, we kind of learned the same way. So what I mean by that is like our parents would have gone to school and they would have learned from a projector, right? The projector would shoot stuff on a screen, they would write it down. Kids now, or kids, well, when we were growing up, we kind of had the same experience. Maybe it was a video that would shoot on the screen, but it was kind of the same thing. So we changed the medium, but we didn't really change how students learn. So I feel that online learning has kind of given us that opportunity to really make the class be more student centered. Like we can kind of focus the learning on the students. There's a lot of different programs we can use for this. Two of the programs I use are Kahoot and Seesaw. Kahoot lets me build kind of like quizzes and fun activities so we can like do them together, we can talk about them. And Seesaw lets the students kind of like complete assignments online. So whether it's like they record their voice or fill out some stuff, both programs work really well. Um, Transitioning to online learning, I guess at the beginning it was kind of a challenge because no one really knew what was going on. And a lot of the time it would happen very suddenly, right? So dealing with technical issues, that was a bit of a challenge. Like I said, nothing beats being in the classroom. Like some kids, in the middle of class, they'll just get up and start walking to their car. And it's like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? So the best thing is having them in the class.
Mhm.
And then technical issues are a problem too. So it's all just stuff to balance, right?
You seem like a pretty put together professional. I mean, you're dressed way better than me for this interview. So you seem like you kind of are very on the ball with the material and the programs and all that. Have you noticed any of your colleagues or any of other teachers maybe struggling a bit more with the transition to the online class?
I would say so. I mean, this is kind of funny, but at the school I'm working at, the manager said to us, when we're doing the online class, we need to wear a mask. Like even if we're online with the students, and I'm kind of like a nicer guy. I was just like, I don't know about that. Like, it's a mask, right? We're online with kids. And she told, the other coworker I have, and he's a little bit more upfront, but he was just like, a mask, really? Like, what do you think? Do you think we really need a mask? It's online, right? So,
Right.
um, her justification was that like it sets a good example for the kids to wear a mask, and she saw like a YouTube video where that teacher had a mask on for Zoom, so we should. I think that was kind of like maybe the biggest like hurdle or like strange thing to overcome. Like I said, in South Korea, it's a very like technologically advanced country. It's I think the fastest internet speeds in the world are here. So it's kind of been like an okay transition. I know there's been some classes, not for me, but I've seen some YouTubers who they'll go into like a Zoom call when a teacher's teaching and do funny stuff, whether it's like lifting up their shirt or like interrupting the teacher. Um, but so far it's been okay. I know actually the challenge we've had is a lot of parents. I mean, a lot of parents kind of use school as almost like a daycare. Like it's kind of like the kid's with me the whole day and the whole night. We finally get to put him in school. We get a bit of a break. Like teachers will take care of him. But online learning has kind of made it so parents need to let their kids stay at home. And obviously, the kids don't want to be inside their kids, right? So it's been kind of hard. Like we've kind of taken a lot of stress and frustration from the parents. Um, so I guess that's been kind of tricky for
Have
us.
you
Yeah.
noticed any, well, kind of building on that point, have you had any students who have been facing a lot of difficulty with this transition? How have students overall been in dealing with this? Have you noticed big changes in how students deal with learning and the material and just the classroom environment in general? What can you tell me about that?
I would say this year is going to be probably the lowest scores overall students will have had in a very long time. I'm pretty like I surf like the Reddit teachers forum quite a bit, and like everyone is just saying like they'll sometimes teach to a class of 20 kids, 50% of the webcams are off. Other people say that they'll teach a class and the kid is like gaming in the background instead of like learning. I think that this is like the hardest year students have ever had. In South Korea, like I said, it's not too bad. Students are pretty disciplined. We have good internet speeds. But I know I would say back home in like the Western world, I think a lot of students have really struggled. Um, and maybe in like public schools here, students have really struggled. But I would say that it's been, a very hard transition for them, especially at the younger ages. They don't want to sit around and look at a screen, right? They want to be in the classroom doing activities. And it's a shame because before this, teaching was kind of changing. Like in the 80s and 90s, teaching was about learning facts, right? How do we get a student to memorize as much as they can? But now it was turning into skills, right? How do we teach them? It's called 21st century skills. So things like creativity, technological literacy, collaboration, critical thinking, things like that. There's 12 of them. And I felt that teaching was going in a really good direction before coronavirus. And now I think it's still going in a good direction. We were able to use new technologies, but it's definitely, more of a challenge with all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, I was reading about that what you're talking about, how in the 80s and 90s, education actually South Korea was the highest graduation rate for higher education out of even compared to most Western countries. I think they were the highest in the world. But one problem that they were running into, which is now happening in the West, is the degrees were just not getting people the careers and the jobs that were expected, and a lot of graduates were actually unemployed, and so that you had this problem of overeducated workers and then undervalued labor and sort of skills training, which was valuable for the economy. And then, as you said, there was this period more recently where it was a focus on skills training, where education and getting a degree is not necessarily the end all be all. And students, and I think slower than students, parents are more reluctant, of course, but it did seem like based on what I was reading, that there's more of a cultural transition towards realizing that, hey, it's not just degrees that matter, it's really skills that matter.
Hmm.
So how has the sort of online classroom, the shift towards that remote learning, has that shifted the focus away from skills training more, or has that interfered with it? Has it, are they at odds with each other, or are they able to kind of still focus on skills training while using the tools of remote learning? Like how has that relationship been?
I would say it's been like I would say in that aspect, I think it's been pretty difficult. Um, I mean, like nothing beats being in person, right? I know a big science project back when I was in high school, and what they do in university is they build a bridge out of popsicle sticks and they see how much it can hold. And I think it's an amazing project, right? It teaches kids so much. And something like that, you can't really simulate on a computer. Like maybe there's some, I know there's a bridge building game where you build that, but just nothing beats coming in person, having that collaboration, working together, trying something, taking it down, building something else. I would say that those skills, I mean, there's going to be a gap. Like there's going to be like a 2 year gap of like a learning deficiency, I guess. Like I'm pretty sure it's going to be noticeable in like standardized tests and everything. It's been a pretty tough year for students, you know.
So let me ask you this: in
Mhm.
because we are kind of, I think, nearing the end of a transition period, and like you said, I think it makes sense that you're going to have this sort of dip where there's just the students are not performing as well, the tests are not doing as well. That's just, I think, a given. But on the other side of that transition, where do you see an education system like South Korea's compared to the rest of the world? And where do you see things going? Do you think that remote learning will be still, even after let's just say the virus is of far less concern? Do you think that remote learning will still be the norm? Will it be more of a hybrid situation? How do you see things after this period of transition?
Yeah, great question. I think that stuff won't be online anymore. I think after the coronavirus, it'll pretty much all be in person. Maybe schools will do it for like flu season. I know that kind of spikes up here in South Korea. So maybe schools will do it for that. Or maybe maybe there will be like some situations, but I can say that, you know, just looking at how hard it was to set everything up, I think schools will mostly be in person. Like I was talking about earlier, like, you know, the way our parents learned is very similar to the way we learned. Education is a very slow to change field. You know, coronavirus kind of like forced it to be online, but I think after this, it'll kind of go back to how it was before. Um, I do hope that there can be some good changes. I know a lot of people in education, they have some great ideas of how we can change it, how we can make it more exciting, engaging, and yeah, teach kids skills for the future. But I think it's just kind of hard to implement a lot of these things, you know? Education, for the most part, I would say around the world, it's very bureaucratic. It's very focused on standardized tests instead of like skills and stuff. And I think after this, it'll kind of go back to how it was before, you know?
Is there any incentive that you can see in the school that you're in, or just ones that you know about, that would, because the way I'm viewing it is remote learning is, despite all its drawbacks and challenges and it's what it's lacking, it is always going to be more efficient. It's just instant. It's remote. It's less logistics required, right?
Mhm.
More economically efficient. Is there any? Do you see that as being any sort of competing with the interests of a good education? Do you see the economic incentives of remote learning as being at odds with the desired outcome of or traditional desired kind of purpose of education? Do you see that there's a clash there at all, or is that not an issue?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that, like in some ways, learning online can solve some of the problems of learning in person. So, for example, learning in person, right? If a kid is sick, they stay home, they miss a day. Maybe it's something really important, like the start of a group project or an important test, right? That's a big problem. With online learning, you can just kind of, you know, have the kid beam in off of Zoom and see what's going on in the class. Maybe they can't get a hands on approach, but they can see the lecture and kind of get a general feel of the classroom. Um, but in some ways, like, it would, so in some ways it's better because the student can still get that learning even if they're at home. But in some ways it's worse because students are going to stay home more. They, like I said, they're students, right? They're going to be distracted by what's on their computer, play games or whatever. I think that, like, the best thing, I know I say that, like, education needs to move forward and change, but I also say that I think it should stay in person. I think learning online, we're getting better and better at it. Zoom is becoming, better. We're learning how to, like, put passcodes on our rooms, protected from people, on the internet invading and, like, just yelling random stuff. But I would say that in person is kind of the best thing. Um, in the book Ready Player One, they talked about the future where people can just, wake up, put on a VR headset, and go to school. But I think in reality, we will be in person for a long, long time.
Okay.
Like, yeah, there might be some situations where we do go hybrid, but I think for the most part, it'll be mostly online.
Is that based on what you would like to see, or do you think that the education system in general wants that? Maybe that's a difficult
I,
question to answer, but
No, no, of course. I think it'll be. I think it's kind of both. I think for me, I just prefer to be in person. It's engaging. You can, like, talk to the kids. You're, like, right there. But it's also like the education system. It's very hard to change, I would say. It's hard to really innovate and do that kind of stuff in education, especially the more with technology being implemented in education, right? If students learn computing and stuff like that, like, it's hard to kind of implement, like, new change every year, right? I
mhm.
know when I was in school, we learned a bit of computing, but it was on super, super old Apple computers, and it just wasn't super practical. So I think the same thing will happen with this, where it's just kind of outdated. The change is just kind of slow. I think it'll be mostly in person still.
Okay. So this is maybe a speed bump or a yeah, like a big change, but it'll sort of slowly uh, go back to the way things were before. But I mean, I guess this is I think that we're going to see a change towards remote learning in the long term for sure. But I
Mhm.
do think in the more immediate future, we're going to have more of a return to normalcy, I guess, in regards to that. Hopefully. I mean, I hope the transition is smooth, if it is going to transition towards online eventually. But
I do think there's some online learning now that will continue in the future. Like, for example, there's a website called freecodecamp.com. They teach you how to code, and if you do that through them completely online, you get their certificate or whatever. You can get a few different ones. There's the Khan Academy, which is awesome for students to learn with. And that's totally online, right? It started as a YouTube channel. I've used it for learning math myself, and it's transitioned into a full academy. Like, there's a ton of courses. Even, like, teachers in the US, they have to do testing. They have that on Khan Academy. You can do it totally online. So I think some stuff will be online. Like, maybe when we think of online learning, we think of, like, students being on Zoom, that kind of learning. But I think a lot more assignments will go out. I think the more immediate transition is more assignments will go out electronically. Students will do more quizzes, projects, assignments online, um, and maybe things like that. Like, maybe students will start collaborating more on different, Google Docs or things like that. So I think that'll be kind of a more immediate transition than maybe, like, Zoom classes in the long run.
you mentioned before something about how it's kind of more, it's more on the student now. It seems
Hmm.
like there's more of a burden on the individual student. I was talking with, I was actually interviewing someone else who lives more locally about that, and they were saying the same thing. It's just a lot more on the student now. Is that something that you find students are adapting well to? Is it something that some students are excelling at and some are just responding very poorly to? Yeah, like kind of how have students been taking that, and in what ways are you noticing that it is more on the students?
Okay, so sure. So when I say on the students, what I mean is like in the past, the students would sit, the teacher would kind of lecture for 30, 90 minutes, whatever. Now students kind of have the opportunity to really engage in the classroom, get involved, and things like that. So that's kind of what I mean. I would say that for the most part, students like it, right? Because they can actually do it, right? Whether it's like, building a bridge with popsicle sticks, or in my classes I'll say, everyone stand up, let's practice this speaking for 5 minutes, or like let's do this 10-minute activity. I want you guys to ask your friends what they do for fun and then write it down. I think that's really important. Even at the start of class, having, like, I call it a do now activity. So it's right when the students come in, there's some activity for them to do. So for example, write down as many things you know, write down, yeah, as many things you know about like the Civil War, and students can just take a piece of paper, write it down, then we discuss it. So it becomes very like that focus on the student, right?
Mhm. So your style of
There's,
teaching
go ahead.
is focused on, it sounds like you're focused on engaging the students in the classroom. Would you say
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
true?
totally. Yeah. There's also there's a lot of big there's a lot of, I guess, big goals that teaching has, and in the future I see a lot of teaching focused on cross-disciplinary learning. So that's where a student learns, like a student will do one project that encompasses math, science, art, English. So for example, in my teaching program I designed one that was related to ocean sustainability. So students would, create, like for math, they would calculate the rate of change of pollution in the ocean. For science, they would look at the effect on climate. English, they would write an essay. So it was kind of like a very practical way of learning a bunch of different subjects at once. I can see that really becoming like a big focus in the future. That practicality, the applied learning, things like that.
Hmm. And you mentioned the academy system that's in
Mhm.
South Korea. How do you view that as has the role of that become more important with the transition to remote learning, or how has that been affected, if at all?
I would say it's kind of been similar to like teaching, where we just kind of have the students go online. I think the biggest thing was like the parents. I think the biggest thing is the parents can really see in the classroom. So now we have, another stakeholder that we kind of have to like focus on. So sometimes, like a lot of the time, the parents do have good feedback for us, but sometimes it's kind of hard to appease every parent. And sometimes parents have conflicting views. One of them says the teacher's not talking enough, another one says the teacher needs to talk more. So it's kind of like a new stakeholder we kind of have to balance in the grand scheme of things, like in teaching.
Hmm. How have your methods of teaching changed with this virus, with remote learning, really?
Yeah, that's good. I would say that at any day, I have to be prepared to whatever I'm doing in class, I have to be able to send it online. Because if we get a text message like, hey, one of the kids at, whatever, Samyuk school, they got, that there's possibly an infection in the school, so everyone in that school is going to stay home today, send me those Zoom links. I have to kind of get that stuff ready like immediately, super quick. Um, I think in the short term, it'll probably hurt students if they start staying home because they're sick, because it kind of puts that focus on, like, kids can stay at home. They don't really need to go to school. They can just hang out in their pajamas, watch class. But nothing really beats learning in person. I think really the best thing is some kind of hybrid system. There was one school in the US, and they did this really, really well, because what they did was it was a school for special education. So students who, have autism, students who aren't super mobile, students who struggle in certain subjects, what they do is they go to the school and they sort of learn off of a laptop, and they kind of like click through slides, learn different things. And it was really exciting because they could kind of take control of their learning. So the student could say, like in grade 5, they could say, I want to learn about science volcanoes. So they could start that unit. And then if they were in person in a big classroom, but they were on a laptop, and if they needed help, they could go to a teacher. Um, and once they finish a unit, they can take like a mastery quiz, and they would show. So what they would do is they would bring the laptop to the teacher. They would show the teacher like this unit is complete, and the teacher would unlock the mastery quiz for the kids to do. If they pass the mastery quiz, then they're finished the unit. So I thought that was a really nice way of doing things. I thought it was really nice to combine like technology with in-person stuff. I thought that was really good. Yeah.
Has your relationship with your students changed?
With online learning,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say for me, it just becomes a little bit less like personal because we're kind of online instead of in person. I still try to do fun stuff with them. Like I'm like, like I'll be like, nice guys, high five, and the student will like do this or whatever. But it's just kind of hard to like get that, I don't know, like that in-person feeling. I know a lot of teachers in the US and Canada, they're really struggling. Like even in high school, they're saying, out of 20 kids, three of them I've never seen, two of them never show up, like never seen as in their camera is always off in Zoom. Two of them never show up. Like I think it's really hard on the kids, especially if they don't have like the support at home, if they don't have the parents pushing them to go to school, if for some reason the internet's cut off. I think it's going to be really hard for them in this transition to online learning.
What do you think Western education systems could learn from South Korea?
Oh, that's good.
If anything, or maybe
Yeah,
maybe
I would say, of course, yeah, I would say like the level of discipline students have in South Korea, that's really good. I think it comes from different things like the family. It transitions to the school. I know students in South Korea and Japan, especially, they take super good care of the school. Like there's never graffiti or writing in the bathroom or anything, and it's because like students have to clean the school. There's a janitor, of course, but students often will sweep, clean up, help organize the classroom, even mop and things. So students are very hesitant to, draw on the ground or whatever, because they're the ones that are going to be cleaning it up. So it kind of teaches students that discipline and kind of like, look, you go to school, but this isn't just like a government institution. This is like your home. You're going to be here for 13 plus years of your life. So let's take good care of it. I think that's a big thing.
I was reading about that, how there's a term for it actually, but how basically students are, when they get more invested in the education system, it also it's almost like the most direct way of improving it, because they're more engaged, they're more working with the teachers and everything, and it becomes a more cohesive sort of feedback loop there. Have you noticed, and this might be again difficult to answer, so if it is, then no worries. But have you noticed a shift, or in what ways have you noticed that remote learning has impacted the attitudes of your students? And like, has their motivation been shot down? Yeah, how has that new environment affected them?
I would say in South Korea, it's been pretty good. Like students still kind of like go with stuff. I would say the discipline here is like very high. So a lot of them just keep kind of going along with stuff. I know in the Western world, I think it's definitely made it really hard on kids, like whether it's like connection issues or like, I mean, they're kids, right? Like we can't expect the same level we have for adults with kids, right? A lot of them, yeah, they'll tab out, they'll, start playing Fortnite on their computer. Like a lot of them, they want to like, be kids. And I think a lot of them are discouraged, even with the fact like they can't really graduate, right? That was a big thing. Walk across the stage, get your diploma, walk off the stage. That was a huge thing, right? Shake hands with the principal. I think a lot of them are really discouraged for that. I think a lot of people in general, even outside of education, have just really had a hard time during this time. But I would say students definitely, they've had a really hard time. Um, I mean, even like meeting with counselors and stuff, that would be such a challenge, right? Um, to like look at like school counselors. I think that's been really hard. I would say in South Korea, the students still keep going as much as they can. I know there was one company. This was really cool, actually. I'll try to find this and send it to you. But it was a South Korean company, and okay. So in South Korea, pretty much every or the okay. So okay, let's rewind. So in South Korea, there's a very tiered university system. There's the top three universities, which the initials are SKY Sky, and those are like the best. If you get a job with them, you're going to be working for Samsung, Hyundai, insurance companies, like a huge, really good job. And then it goes down from there. And how you get into these schools is you do something similar to, I think it's the SAT in America, the high school test. You do that, and depending on that score, that's the university you're going to get in. Um, and there was one company that did a really good job of teaching students like math, science, Korean, all the stuff they need to know for that test. And they were online. And the commercials they do, I'm not kidding you, they look like professionally done. Like they're full on, like it looks like an action movie. And like they'll like it'll be like a teacher holding a sword, like the camera will be turning in like a really cool way. And I think they've really taken off business wise in the last little bit, just because of that online learning. So I think like in the short term, maybe in the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to go back to being in person. But I think things like that are huge. And I think if we had more of that in North America, that would be awesome. But the fact that students can watch and learn from someone like this, I think that's fantastic, for them to learn from like an academy, a professional, someone who's been teaching it for so long. I think that really helps a lot.
It sounds like it's an alternative, kind of specialized form of education that's available to students, is what you just described, right? It's like something
Yeah, yeah.
outside of
And it's
the education system that is being offered to students.
definitely, yeah. And it's something that, so, and it kind of solves the problem of, 20 or 30 years ago, if your English teacher sucks, you're going to have a bad mark on your test. It's really hard to get around that. Maybe you can get a book at the library, or like maybe you can like, get a book at a bookstore, like learning English for dummies or something. But I think that like seeing that teacher on YouTube explain a concept, break something down, I think that's fantastic. You can see the video and really learn in a really good way to supplement your learning. Something I wanted to say with online learning is a lot of institutions, I think, will be more centralized. Like now, there's only, this is like not real numbers, but there's only like 30,000 students at Harvard, or, whatever, 10,000 students at Harvard. But with the switch to online, there isn't really a limit of how many students you could have. So I think with being online, more students are going to go for those universities, right? Like there's no limit. You could have 100,000 students on Harvard as long as you have the servers for it, right? You could have a teacher live streaming to like a third of those. So I think that's going to be a big thing in the future. Maybe we will see less of like smaller universities and it'll be more kind of centralized, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I know that with Korea, they have a centralized Ministry of Education, and there is similar
Mhm.
equivalents in the West, but I think just by the nature of Korea being a smaller country, smaller population, they're able to have much more kind of top-down control with education. It sounds like things are getting more competitive, or certainly streamlined with education. Is that accurate?
In what way?
Well, in the way that, like you said, a lot of students are kind of now able to go to these higher universities, whether it's because of alternate ways to learn the material in order to get in, and just more easier ways to learn because of that, and also because there's just no limit to the kind of online space of who can be in a university. Is that making things more competitive? It seems like it would.
I would say so. Yeah. Like, I mean, I think so. I think, as more like in terms of a global sphere, as more countries develop, as technology develops, it becomes like a shrinking world, right? So even in really poorer developing countries, students can still get similar lessons to students in Canada or the US through YouTube or Khan Academy or whatever different medium. So I would say now you're not competing with, the 350 million people in the US. You're competing with people on a global sphere. And I would say a lot of the ambitions and drive from people in developing countries would definitely make it harder. In the competing aspect. I think that's one thing that, like, in a global world, I think that's kind of, it makes it more competitive. I would say this year, like I said, it's been kind of a bump. Students' motivation, it's all over. South Korean students have been really good, I would say. Like, they've, kept on. They have good discipline. Some of them I teach, they'll obviously tab out, because when they tab out, their video goes away. So I'll call them out and say, like, bring your video back. What happened? But I think it's been, more of a more difficult in like public schools, and especially in the West. I see a lot of teachers talking about just how difficult it's been. Like they're about to finish the year. Some students are, not like, they've just never met some students. So I think that's pretty tricky in that aspect.
How do you view your career going forward as a teacher, and sort of your role in this whole shifting system of education? Do you find that you might be interested in teaching in a different way, or do you find that you're kind of just happy going with what the education system that you're currently in is like? Yeah, kind of just how do you view your place in the future of education, whatever that might be? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, like, so education, it really feels like it's my passion. Like, it really feels like it's like my thing. In terms of like being, a global educator, like outside of Canada, I think there's a big focus on teaching students kind of like we're part of like a community, part of like a big world, right? Like, your actions can really change different things in the world. I'm looking at something called, so my goal is to teach in something called an international school, which is basically, it's a school located in a foreign country that teaches like the American, Canadian, British curriculum. Parents pay between $10,000 and $40,000 per year for students to go here, and they learn kind of like the schools teach what American or Canadian public schools would teach. So, for example, at a Canadian school, they would learn like about the history of Canada. They would learn some French. They would learn like basically public schools here. I would say there's a big focus on developing the child holistically, which I'm really passionate about. It's not just teaching them math, science, whatever. It's about teaching them like really how to be like a good person, how to like treat people well. And I think I have the biggest opportunity to do that when the kids are young, right? Whether you teach them it's wrong to like fight each other, argue, teach them they should work more together. I think that's huge. So for me, I think that's a big thing going forward, like teaching them those skills to just be awesome people in life. Um, Teaching them like the practicality of stuff, I think that's great. If I teach them, like, so I teach math and English now, mostly English though. And if I teach them, like, here's how we calculate the volume of a cylinder, I turn it on them, right? I say to them, how can we use this? And students will say, like, oh, well, maybe we're making toothpaste. We need to know how much to put in the toothpaste bottle. Maybe we're doing some other thing. So it kind of teaches them, like, okay, we're learning math, but this is practical stuff. We can really use this in the real world, right? Um, yeah, I would say that that's kind of how I feel I can like help students and teach them in the future.
It seems like the role of education in general, globally, is expanding in students' lives. Is that, do you think that's accurate? Do you think that's fair to say? Or is it, or
I would say so, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Because before it was kind of just focused on come in, guys, we're gonna learn this subject for 30 minutes. But now it's turning into more practical projects, right? It's turning into, okay, I'm gonna give everyone a plant. Go home and plant it. Let's see what happens. Okay, a month later, plants die. Okay, well, how do we fix that? Well, we need more nitrogen in the soil. Okay, so let's use this fertilizer. Let's try again. So it's kind of becoming more of that practical hands-on students can really like learn and try stuff approach. And I think that's really big, especially now.
you mentioned a lot of the challenges with remote learning and a lot of what you would like to see in regards to kind of going back to more in person or even hybrid learning. Yeah, I wanted to just get some kind of final thoughts on your prescription of what you would like to see going forward, just from your perspective as a teacher. Like, what would you like more, whether it's in the South Korean education system or the online environment, or just more globally speaking? What kind of changes would you like to see, and what direction would you like to go, or would you like it to go based on your experiences?
Yeah, so with online learning, I would love to see like for me, I think the best thing would be having students go to school in person during the day. In a lot of ways, it's not efficient. Obviously you have to have a building that's air conditioned and it kind of takes up a lot of like space and money, but I do think it is the best. I think having these online platforms where students can get that extra learning, where students can do more practical assignments, where they can kind of, yeah, get the supplementary learning, I think that's huge, right? Instead of a student really struggling to understand a concept, they can watch a 5-minute YouTube video or go to like education.com, look up a concept and figure it out from there. I think that's really big. Um, I would say that's huge. Having students, like I said, when students clean the school, they take that sense of discipline and ownership onto them. And I think that's huge. I think in Canada, we've kind of slipped away from having the students take responsibility. I think a lot of responsibility and blame kind of falls on the teacher, which obviously no one's perfect. There is some blame in every situation for everyone. But I think in South Korea, there's a big focus on the student has to kind of adapt and figure stuff out. And that maybe if we had a bit more of that in Canada, it would be okay. Or in the West, it would be okay. Um, I think maybe a move away from standardized testing. I know that's really big also. So students focus more on skills, learning practical things. I mean, a student can learn so much practical stuff in like an after school coding club versus I don't know, like some other subject in school, right? So I think that's huge, teaching them real skills they can learn, whether it's the like very practical skills like coding, things like that, or whether it's like more the 21st century skills with critical thinking, collaboration. I would say those are kind of the big things of where we can go in the future. The other thing is that in the future, I think we'll see a lot more students abroad with these international schools get that American, Canadian learning experience just because they can, so many more are opening up around the world. The world as a whole is doing better. People are making more money. More countries are democratic. So I do think a lot of people will try to go for more of that education, even in their home countries. And it's just amazing, meeting kids, meeting people, and yeah, students abroad, wherever I've traveled, who really like they'll really do anything to get to like America, Canada, Australia. Like they'll study so hard, they'll pass any English test they can, which they have to do to study at those universities. But I think in the future we'll see a lot more students, be willing to go to different countries. I think if one school opens up to have students do online learning, like and the teachers in Canada or whatever, I think that would be really, really popular with students. I think that would really take off. I think there'd be a lot of logistical stuff or like a lot of like bureaucracy to get around. Like obviously, if one teacher is teaching online to hundreds of kids, that's going to leave a lot of teachers unemployed. which will cause some problems, with unions, or teachers might strike or whatever. But I think that would be amazing to see one teacher teach to so many kids abroad. So
Where does your passion for education come from, and why do you feel it's important? And what specifically about education do you feel is important? You mentioned like holistic education and kind of, teaching students how to be a good person. So tell me a little bit about like that, like your kind of passion for that. Where did that come from? And yeah, what do you value with that?
I'll tell you the story that kind of made me realize, like, okay, teaching's for me. This is what I need to do. So there was one student I had in my class. I'm going to give him a fake name. Let's call him Steven. And he had a lot of like anger issues. He had really bad rage problems. This was when I was in public schools teaching in South Korea. He had some really bad rage problems. He would yell a lot. Even in the hallway, I could hear him yelling. And with him, in my class, there was one day where he was having a really bad day. I don't know what happened before, but he was just having a really, really rough day. And in my class, he was playing with some kind of like cards. They weren't like Pokemon cards, but they were like dragon themed trading cards, whatever. Um, so I gave the kids an assignment. I got them going on an assignment, and I pulled up a chair next to him and I said, Steven, can I see your cards? And he kind of like, protected them, held them close. And I was like, Steven, I'm not going to take them away. I promise. I just want to see them. And he was kind of hesitant, but he gave me his cards. And I sat there with him and I went through like every card with him. And I was like, wow, he looks strong. Oh, he fights really hard. My favorite color is blue. And I just talked with him, whatever. And at the end, when we were finished the cards, I put them together and I said, Steven, these are really nice cards. And a lot of students here, they have water. Some students eat snacks. I would be really sad if they got stained or damaged. Could you put them in your backpack just so they don't get damaged? And he was just instantly like, okay, teacher, sure. And he puts them in his backpack. And it was just this amazing moment where by showing the kid like patience and understanding, I got him to kind of behave in the classroom well and kind of got that going with him. I think for me, it comes from my patience. I think I have I don't know the word, a good judgment of what's right and what's wrong. I used to do a lot of like improv acting. So I really like being in front of the class, entertaining. And I think I have a good balance of like being funny and being strict in the classroom, which makes my classes, I think, really effective. For me, I guess teaching kind of, yeah, it encompasses that and it gives me the opportunity to travel, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Teachers, if you're in like public education or if you're in like international schooling, you get 2 or 3 months off per year, which is crazy, right? That's amazing. So it gives me that opportunity to live abroad, teach somewhere super cool like South Korea, and then also travel in the summer. Like I've been to over 41 countries now, or I've been to 41 countries now, and like I don't want to stop. I want to keep going. The plan for this year was to hike Nepal, see Everest, but that obviously got hindered a little bit. So I would say that's kind of where it comes from.
Okay, that's awesome. Sounds like you have a great um, passion in there, and it sounds like you have a good relationship with students. I do worry a little bit because that story, as great as it was, I think it's not really possible to reach a student in that way through remote learning, through Zoom.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, I mean, just I don't know, being in person, it's so different. Like maybe there's an argument for if we use like super engaging fun activities, maybe the student isn't going to look at, whatever trading cards in person. They're going to be engaged in the assignment. They're going to be talking to their friends. I think that's more like in a fictional world. I think that's hard to do, but nothing beats being in person, right? Even like I learned a little bit about his family situation, and I think it's just hard to do that with online learning, right? Um, I think if he was at home alone, he would have a hard time starting up his computer, or he would have a hard time joining the Zoom class or whatever. I think that would be a challenge for sure. So
Well, I think that covers all the questions I have. And I mean, you gave very good, thorough sort of descriptions of everything. I mean, you did a great, I feel like I feel like this was a private Zoom class and I learned a lesson here. So,
I'll assign some homework now, and yeah,
yeah, no,
test is coming.
this has been really